are going to airbrush this HO scale slot car. Now HO scale slot cars are 1/64, the same scale as Hot Wheels. I could use really nice paints with my airbrush like I should be doing. But if you guys follow my channel at all, you know I like to try new things. I like to push the limits. And I like to keep things, well, kind of sort of on the cheap to see if we can do it to help others that are just getting started in this hobby to get started without having to spend a lot of money. So with that being said, we are going to try to paint this car with cheap craft acrylic paints that you can pick up at your local big box stores. These are very, very inexpensive paints. So we're going to use these cheap paints to see what kind of a finish we can get on this HO scale slot car body. We are going to have to remove the plastic for the windshields and for these headlights on these. If you can see in here, these have been, well, melted in. There's a little posts right there that go through the holes on these, and the posts are melted. Now there are two ways that you can try to take these apart. You can either try to cut them off, or you can try to melt them off. All right, well, as you can see, hopefully, let me get my little pointer in here. This post here I have freed already. Pretty simple. What I have done is I took a straight razor, one of these, well, I guess you call it a straight razor, razor blade. I tried using my X-Acto knife, but the handle being so long, it was a very bad angle to try to get in there. So I ended up just using this regular razor blade. I also went one step further and I cut the tabs that were holding this little wing in place. This is going to make painting the back of this car with the livery style that I have in mind much easier for me to do. So our next step, we are going to need to wash these parts that we're going to be painting real good with some soap and water, and we're going to have to hit them with a primer. And I am going to be using just a rattle can spray primer. Here is our little 1/64 scale slot car in primer. Again, I just used Krylon gray primer right out of a rattle can. I only gave it one little light coat. I did not want to overdo it. Our next step is going to be to mix up our baby blue. This is Deco Art Americana baby blue. Again, just a very cheap acrylic craft paint. And I'm going to be thinning this with just plain old windshield washer fluid. Now, if you want to learn more about thinning your paints with windshield washer fluid, I will put a link at the end of this video to a video I did on, you guessed it, thinning paints with windshield washer fluid. I think our paint is mixed up relatively well. I think it's good enough. Now, the next step is the most vital and most important step in airbrushing. And I mention this in every single video that I do about airbrushing. And that step is to filter your paints. You need to have a good filter. This is a very fine stainless steel mesh filter. I bought this off of Amazon. I will put a link in the description below if you want to go check one out for yourself. It actually came as a 3-pack. You need to filter your paints, especially using these craft paints, guys. I cannot stress enough that if you do not filter them, you will be fighting with your airbrush on your paint job, and you could potentially ruin your paint job because of a lot of spitting and sputtering. And here is our thinned and filtered airbrush paint. Now, let's do some painting. Our airbrush is loaded up and ready to go, so let's get started. I'm going to start with the wing of the car. Light coats. You do not want to get any runs. I will admit I am a little concerned because some of these particles that are coming out are quite large still. So I do not know what kind of a paint job this is actually going to turn out to be like. But that's why we are doing this here on Paul's Railroad, to see what we can get away with. All right. Well, I don't know how well this is going to pick up on the camera. We have 3 coats of the baby blue Americana craft paint on our HO scale slot car. And I don't know if you can see it or not, but this being craft paint, it is not self-leveling, and there is some texture to the paint on this car. It's not nice and smooth, not the way I would like it. Now from far away you really can't see it, but when you get up close, you can see some texturing. Again, I'm not sure if the camera can pick it up, but I can see it. All I'm going to do is I have my 3000 grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to very gently just rub it across the surface, blow it off, take a look, rinse and repeat. If you've never sanded a model like this before, I will tell you to be very careful when you're getting up against your edges, your corners, any sharp edge. You do not want to sand it very much, if at all, because you will burn through this paint super duper fast. And I just did what I said not to do. Guess what that means? That's right. Back to the paint job. See? Gotta be super careful when you're doing this stuff. Okay, so I'm just gonna knock all this down off camera, and I'm gonna shoot it again with some more blue paint, and we'll pick up where I left off. Well, here we go. My second attempt at painting this particular car. Now, I've done something a little different here. After burning through this so quickly and so easily, I do not want to take a chance and sand this again. So what I did, when I went back and repainted this, I over-reduced our cheap craft paints to more of a very watery consistency instead of milk. And I upped my air pressure on my compressor from 25 to about 32 psi. I also held my airbrush back almost 10 inches from this car body and shot it that way, and I did about 4 very thin coats. That seems to have helped out quite a bit. The paint is not as textured as it was when I first painted it. I'm going to use this to top coat this to give it extra protection before I go on to our next step, which is putting down some tape for our next color of paint. My first coat of clear is on. Now this is supposed to be very durable to help so that I don't pull any paint up when I put my tape lines down. So we're going to let this coat dry a little bit. Then we're going to put another coat on. I want it to go completely dry. I want it to be, you know, that kind of a tacky, wet looking dry. Well, here is our Dodge Charger Daytona with the clear coat on it. Now, as you can see, hopefully you can see, there's still some orange peel. It does not look too bad considering the paint that we used for this. What we're going to be doing next is we're going to take some of this fine line tape. We're going to tape out our design for our next color, and then we're going to paint it. You know, this is my first time trying this, so my masking job is not the greatest. I'm not even sure I got really straight lines, but what I'm going to do to try to help make this a good paint job is before I put color down, I'm going to go back, I'm going to take my clear, I'm going to put a coat of clear down, just a light coat, hopefully enough just to seal in the edges of this tape. So since I'm using my big air compressor to run my air assist on my laser, we're going to be going back to the old portable air compressor here to do this job. It should work just fine. But let's get started on it and find out. Okay, so we are ready for our second and final coat of paint. And what we are going to be using is Americana craft paint. This is Orange Flame. Again, just a cheap craft paint. I will be over thinning this just a little bit more than the consistency of milk to see if I can get a better lay down of paint than I did with the blue. It seemed to work a little bit better when I reshot the blue, so we're going to try that. This paint is so thin, I'm putting on very, very thin and light layers. After many, many coats of paint, this is what we are left with. This did not turn out too terribly bad. I suspected it to be much worse than this. Again, we had a little bit of bleed through right here. some right here, and it appears to have maybe a little bit right around in here, or just a little bit right there maybe. That's not too terrible. My tape job is not completely even, but like I said, this was my first time, so I'm not going to complain too much about that. Notice I got real narrow on the back side here. But hey, you know what? I think I can live with this. Okay, next step, I'm going to be taping off the sides because I want to put an orange stripe down the sides as well, I do believe. Let's peel her open and have a look. And we have bleed through. And we have more bleed through. We definitely had some bleed through on these side taping jobs. And of course I had some bleed through up here and here. It's time to fix it, and well, we're going back to the trusty old paintbrush. See if we can get this fixed up. Since I like to do things the difficult way, I actually have a laser, and I tried cutting out these itty bitty little templates. We have the beginnings on the car, and we're going to hit it with some white paint, which I wanted to practice this anyways because I do have label paper for my printer. And if I start painting cars and I start using labels, I'm going to have a white background to put the labels on. So this is good practice. The masks are on. They're definitely not perfect. And I have a little faith in how well this is going to work. But hey, that's why we're doing this, where we're trying new things. And I'm using just regular old apple barrel black paint. Alright, moment of truth. Before this paint dries 100%, let's peel it. That was a bit of a mistake. Well, there's a number on there, and it looks like dog doo-doo. That black line around it is way too thick. I will say that the Golf actually turned out better than I expected it would. It still sucks, but it's a lot better than I thought. Let us throw some clear coat on it. The paint is dry and the car is reassembled, but before the big reveal, let's take just a moment and talk about some of the items I used to create this paint job. Starting with masking tape. As you can see here, I use different sizes of masking tape to mask the car off with, and we will talk about this one here in just a minute. I am not super happy with this masking tape, and I'll tell you why. As the title suggested, I use just super cheap acrylic craft paints that you can pick up at any big box store. We used Americana brand, Full Cart brand, and Apple Barrel brand. And I thinned those with just plain old windshield washer fluid that you would put in your automobile. That's all I used to make these paints run through my airbrush. Now I know I said I was going to use nothing but cheap acrylic craft paints to paint the car, which I did. That was not a lie. But I cheated a little bit because I used a very nice top coat and a very nice clear coat made by Creatix to seal in the paint. I did that because I did not want to use a rattle can clear coat, simply because there's a chance that they could yellow over time or crack and flake when you use rattle can clear coats. This is a very high-end, very good clear coat, again made by Creatix, and this is just the reducer or thinner for the Creatix brand of paints. So I did cheat a little bit and use this, but it's my channel, it's my car, so I'm allowed to. All right, you ready for the big reveal? Let's take a closer look at it. I'll tell you exactly what I think about this paint job. And man, that turntable spins fast. Well, before I pick this paint job apart, let's see if it worked. Now, the reason why I created this video again was to see if we could get a good paint job using cheap craft paints. And I can't think of a better way than to compare my paint job with a factory painted slot car. All right, let's bring him in for a closer look. Now, other than the problems with my paint job that are my fault, and we'll get to those in just a minute, let's take a look at the actual, just the finish of the paint. Now, as you can see on the factory paint job, it is nice and smooth, mirror-like finish on that roof. And let's look at mine. Oh yeah, look at all of that orange peel. Now, I don't know if I could have done anything better to fix that. Again, this is my first time painting something like this. I am used to painting, well, something like this. This is what I've been painting for years. Heavy weathered pieces of rolling stock, building, etc. So orange peel actually works for me in that application. On this, however, it looks really bad. The simple fact that I have all this orange peel all over this car might just be the nature of the craft paints. You know, I thinned the paint down real well. I even played with my air pressures on my air compressor to try to get it to atomize even better. And this is the best that I could do. Now I have, about 8 or 9 coats of clear coat on top of this. Could I wet sand it and get a better look? I don't know. But it does not look as good as that. At least not close up. From afar, it don't look too bad. Is it doable? Yeah, it's doable. Is it going to be as good as this? I don't think it ever will be. The simple fact of these craft paints are they're cheap. They're made cheap and they paint cheap. And they're not designed to be used in an airbrush. Even with these two Americanas here, it's the same brand but different colors. The thickness or the viscosity of these paints are quite different from each other. So you're always guessing when you're thinning your paints as to whether you're going to get a good spray pattern out of your airbrush. That's the difference. That's the big difference between cheap craft paints and higher end airbrush paints such as the Creatix brand. Their viscosity is the same across their brand or across their group. So if you buy their primary colors, the viscosity of all those colors is going to be exactly the same. You can go on the Creatix website and they'll tell you the ratio to thin your paints down. And you can do it for the red, the blue, the green, as long as it's in the same family of paints. And that is a big difference. That is the main difference why a lot of people won't use these craft acrylic paints for airbrushing. I use them because they're cheap, and I do mostly this type of airbrush painting, which is just a lot of heavy weathering. And that looks great on this. All that little extra texture. All right, so in the end, it works, but don't expect anything fantastic from craft paints. Now, I love this car because I learned from this car. I made quite a few mistakes when painting this car. Let's talk about those mistakes real quick in case you didn't pick up on them, and hopefully you can avoid the mistakes that I made. My first mistake was using a gray primer. This blue is a light color, and I should have used a white primer instead of the gray. That would have allowed me to use less coats of the blue paint to get to the color that I wanted. And a thinner coat is always going to be better. You're not going to lose the detail of the castings of your vehicles or whatever you're painting. You're not going to have that thick buildup that's going to take longer to dry and potentially could scratch much easier. That's why you want to use the least amount of coats that you possibly can to get the color that you want. My second mistake was using this masking tape. Now, let me back out here just a second. This masking tape is relatively thin when it comes to masking tapes, and I did buy it in the modeling section of Hobby Lobby, but still way too thick for a 1/64 scale car. This would work just fine on your regular 1/24 scale models, I'm sure. Something this small, way too thick. The problem I had with this one is if you can look, let me move a few things here. If you look at the front of this car, if it will zoom in focus. Okay, the problem I had with using that tape being that it's wide for a 1/64 scale car and it's paper, so it doesn't bend very much is, as you can see, my lines were uneven. And I tried taping this thing so many times to get even lines, and that is the best that I could do. It's not super noticeable, but I see it every time, and now you will too, so you're welcome for that. So that was the wrong tape to use for this. I should have taken my wife's Cricut machine and cut my own vinyl strips to use for this. My next project, I will be doing that. So make sure you're using the right tape. Also, this tape, for some reason, just didn't stick very well. And I had a lot of bleeding through on this car. As you can see, like on the roof. Some of it I fixed a little bit on the side of the door jambs. Anyways, I really did press down a lot on this tape, and I still got a lot of bleed through. My third mistake was putting down the orange first before putting down, again, a white coat under that orange. Why? Because that orange took, I think, 8 or 10 coats to get it orange. When I first started, it was almost brown. And having that many thick coats, I don't know if we'll be able to see it or not, but yeah, you can kind of see it. I have ridges where the stripe stops and the regular blue paint begins. That is because I had to use so many coats to get this orange actually orange. And again, my other mess up was, and we all saw that, the narrowing of the stripe in the back. As a matter of fact, I shouldn't even had that stripe there. I should have painted a different angle. Okay, that's a different thing. But anyways, should have used white under the orange. 1 coat or 2 coats of white, and I probably could have gotten away with just 2 coats of the orange, and it would have been much cleaner paint job. On to my last big mistake that I'm going to talk about. And yes, I know there are others, but let's just get into this one here because this is a pretty big one too. And that was me trying to use my laser to cut out the golf in the number boards on the side of this car. This 1/64 scale is way too small to do that. As you can see, I mean, it sort of worked. I know that the golf on the hood is totally wrong. It's should have orange in it, should be wider. I get all that, but that's what I was trying to do, and it did not work out well at all. And on the sideboards and even on the hood, the black circle around the white, way too thick. I kind of had a feeling it was going to be way too thick, but I was so afraid to cut into the paint or the tape narrower with the laser because I was afraid that it just wouldn't work. So I made it a little thick, and it looks, well, like crap. But the laser did do a fine job in cutting out just the open circle, which I will use in the future to put water slide decals over. So that is something that I messed up on. I should have just used the circle, painted it white, and actually either bought or printed out some water slide decals for this. But, you know, to be perfectly frank with you, I saw where this project was going. I did not like the paint job, so I was getting lazy and did not want to invest any more time or actually any money in some decals for something that I knew I was not going to be completely happy with. We've come to the portion of the video where I want you to leave me a comment. I want you to tell me what you think about this paint job on this car, and be honest. Don't be mean, but be honest. I know I messed up on a lot of aspects of painting this car. Like I said, this is my first time trying to paint something this nice. So if you have done this before, if you have tips, tricks, something that can be done better to get a better finish using acrylic craft paints, please leave a comment so that I can learn and fellow viewers can learn as well. Guys, I loved painting this car. I cannot wait to do my next one. And with that, thank you for spending your time with me. Thank you for watching my videos. God bless, and take care, everyone.